we live our lives in the identity that has been indoctrinated from us, and that quite literally steals our power as a supreme being. It's time, literally, like they say, wake up and smell the coffee. Wake up and smell the truth. Wake up and be the truth. Ask yourself these questions. If you truly knew that you were a supreme being, what power would you have? Would you get into your petty fears? Would you worry about money? Because when you have that epiphany and that awareness and aha, that is an awakening, and that awakening to the higher part of you. And when you come to know this truth that I'm talking about in this episode, in that moment, you become. You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This is a continuation of the series on being a zero-limit person. This is part 2. I'm not sure how many episodes will be in this series, but mainly what I want to do in this series, basically get the ball across the plate and get you to start thinking from a new paradigm and get you to start thinking in a new way about what is possible for you beyond your simple human identity. So let's dig further into how to be a zero-limit person, and let's take you further. Keep listening. Being a zero-limit person. You know, in the course of this podcast, I have done many episodes on and talking about your identity. And your identity basically is who and what you are, how you identify. How you identify will determine the outcomes that you create in life. As you probably, if you've listened for any amount of time, you know that I used to identify as someone poor. I grew up a small town Texas country boy, and because I held that identity for many years, it was very challenging for me to make any significant amount of money. But what I want to do in this episode is I want to talk about the concept of dual identity. And when I say dual identity, we have an identity as a 3D human being, but I want to talk about a higher identity, identifying as a soulful spiritual being, but not from the context of the human being, basically identifying as a soulful being from a higher perspective. Now, when I say that, what I mean is I want to look at this inductively, because when we think and when we reason both deductively and inductively. And many of us, we identify very easily with our deductive identity. The deductive identity would be, for example, I am a human being here on the planet. Part of that identity in that basket, I could say, well, I'm an American, I'm male. Or you could say, you know, you're white, you're black, you're Chinese, you're Venezuelan, you're Russian, you're gay, you're poor, whatever it might be. That identity of being a human being, and you can even say you are a spiritual human being. So from that identity of being a human being, it's like a basket. You put all these things into the basket because you're thinking deductively, meaning, okay, I was born in America, so therefore I must be an American. So this is what people call the color white, and this is, I look like that, so I must be a white person. That is deductive identity. But what about inductive identity? Deductive is actually reasoning from the top down. Inductive is reasoning from the bottom up. So when we look at being human, when we're using deductive identity, we create it from being deductive from we are a human. Now let's analyze and reason down from that. But I want to go the opposite direction in this episode because, again, I want to take you beyond the limits. So I want to go inductively. And inductively would be, let's reason from where you are on the planet right now, but that's the floor. And let's actually start thinking what's high. When I say high, what's above that? What does it mean if you weren't even thinking like within the container of being a human being? So when I said deductively, we reason down, and inductively, we reason up. What does that mean? Up. Up where? Up to what? And what that means in the context that I'm using it is up and beyond the human experience, up and beyond human knowing, human socialization, human norms, customs, beliefs, and all the things that we are taught on this planet. Metaphorically, I could say it in a different way, or actually analogously, not metaphorically. I always get those two words mixed up for whatever reason. But let's say that I took you to the moon and you were looking at planet Earth from the moon, you would have a completely different perspective on planet Earth. But when you're on planet Earth and you're actually analyzing and thinking deductively, you're thinking from the frame and the position of being a human being, and you're thinking from only within the context of what you know of what it means to be a human being. But if I put you on the moon and you're looking at you on the planet being a human being, it has a whole new meaning because of the perspective. So what we want to do in this episode is cut through all the human dogma, the religion, the nationality, and the culturalization. And we want to look at you, so to speak, beyond all of that and look at you from the lens, let's call it a cosmic lens. When you're thinking deductively, you also think within the frames of what you believe. You could believe this is bad or this is good or whatever, but it's all human deduction based upon your experience on the planet. An offshoot comment here. I said many episodes ago that Don Juan Matus, who was my brother-in-law Don Javier's mentor, once said to me, beliefs are archaic. When you think about that, why are beliefs archaic? Beliefs are archaic because we've learned beliefs generationally, and we've learned things that aren't even true anymore. And that's what he was meaning when he was saying beliefs are archaic. But he also meant beliefs about what we think is and is not true about humanity. So I want to take a leap here and I want to share a thought. In 2007, and over the course of since the advent of YouTube, which I believe is 2005, Don Javier has literally sent me 2 videos from YouTube in 20-something years, or however many years that is, 18 years or whatever it is, I don't know. But he sent me 2 videos. One video was of a musician, another video, and you can still find it on YouTube, and I tell people in TCP about this a lot. It's called Vivek, V-I-V-E-K, Vivek, the homeless prophet. And in that video, he said that men, meaning humans, are gods. Humans are gods. Now, I do remember watching Oprah Winfrey one time, probably, I don't know, 2000 and maybe 1999, 98, 2001, whatever. I didn't watch a lot of Oprah, but I caught this episode. She was interviewing Wayne Dyer, and Wayne Dyer said, "You're God. Everyone here, you are God." And Oprah said, there are a lot of people that are probably going to have a problem with that statement. And he said, "Oh, well, I'm telling you the truth." So Vivek, the homeless prophet, talks about men being gods. Wayne Dyer was talking about, and I'm pretty sure he didn't watch the video of Vivek, the homeless prophet. But see, here's where we're being deductive, is that from the human perspective and then deducing down from that, we have learned, and there is a hierarchy in the universe, just like there's a hierarchy on the planet. You might have the United Nations, and then you have a government like the United States or China or whatever, and then you have states, and then you have cities, and then you have townships, etc. So there's a hierarchy. But what's interesting as human beings, in this hierarchy, we have an end-all be-all top of the hierarchy, especially in Christianity and Islam. The end-all be-all at the top of that hierarchy is God, but it's a deity and it's a dogmatic deity. And that dogmatic deity, whether it be Islam, whether it be Christianity, or another fundamental religion, that dogmatic deity is at the top of the hierarchy, and everything works down from that dogmatic deity. But again, we're going to go inductively and we're going to go up, beyond that in this particular episode. I did an episode a while back talking about you are the ultimate power in the universe. A similar thing to what I'm saying here is that ultimate power in the universe. You can call it source. You can call it supreme being. You can call it consciousness. You can call it the quantum field, or as many in organized religion call it, you can call it God. Last night, I don't recall what I was watching. It was probably something on YouTube, but this stuck with me, and it's nothing new. Growing up in Texas, the mega churches are on every street corner. In Texas, you have on one corner, you have a mega church, and then on another corner, you have a strip joint. And I'm kidding, but I'm kind of not kidding. I mean, in Texas, and I don't care if this offends. I can't offend you. It would only be offending your beliefs. I heard this joke one time that in Texas, the Baptists are becoming a lot friendlier and that they are now waving at each other at the liquor store. So funny, not funny. I find that pretty humorous in the way that I grew up. In this video that I was watching, these people were serious, and I understand it, but they're caught in a dogma. They were talking about how Jesus is their savior. And somebody also said, oh, and our Lord, and Jesus is the son of our Lord. It's all dogma. That takes your power. It takes your power away from you. Off topic here for a second, I outsource my podcast production. We used to do everything in-house. And my podcast engineer right now, his name is Oscar, and he's in Venezuela, and I'm in the United States. But the thing about Oscar is I don't see any difference between Oscar and I. I like Oscar. Oscar has a really good presence. I enjoy working with Oscar. As far as I'm concerned, Oscar and I are the same. But when you subscribe to the dogmatic deity, what happens is that dogmatic deity and the doctrine that follows separates people and, so to speak, waters them down. This is why you see so much separation in the world, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. But I talked about God and Lord and Savior and blah, blah, blah. The only truth is God is consciousness, and that's physics. And everything comes from consciousness. And your awareness of that consciousness is metaphorically the representation of the Jesus of history, who was Jesus. So when we're thinking dogmatically, we say, okay, God, the guy with the white beard sitting up in heaven, is top of the pyramid. And then right below that, his vice president, so to speak, vice God, is Jesus, the Son of God. Not even recognizing that God is consciousness and Jesus is the aware of consciousness. I went to a private liberal arts school called Texas Lutheran College. I went there for two reasons. One is it was small, and I wanted a small school. And secondly, it had a really good, it still is, a really good liberal arts school. And going to TLC, we were all required, the acronym TLC, now it's TLU, Texas Lutheran University. We were all required to take, I don't know how many hours, 9 hours of religion, I think it was, or 12 hours, which would be 3 courses over the course of our college career. And we all had to take Introduction to Religion or something like that, or Introduction to Christianity. I don't recall what it was. But I remember one night I was watching something on TV, and it was talking about the creation of the earth. It was akin to like the Ten Commandments or something, the movie with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston, et cetera, back from the 1950s. But in this, whatever I was watching, it was talking about it from a biblical perspective. It said that God made the animals first, if I remember correctly, and I could have this wrong, but God made, in the Christian narrative, okay, the fundamental narrative is that God created the animals first, and then he created man. But then he didn't want man to be lonely, so then he created Eve. And I remember that stuck in my mind. And the next day after class, I asked Dr. Beck if I could talk to him. Dr. Beck was one of the theology professors. And I said, Dr. Beck, it doesn't make any sense to me. If God was smart enough to know to make animals in pairs, then why didn't he make humans in pairs? And Dr. Beck started laughing in a good way. He's a very loving, supportive, very kind man. And he said, well, you have to understand, the Bible is not meant to be taken literally. The Bible is a storybook to better understand the wisdom of how to live a healthy life, but it's not meant to be taken literally. I look around today, you see things on YouTube and different fundamental churches, and like the Westboro Baptist Church, these people are toxic. The Southern Law Center call them like what do they call them? Racist, or I mean, it's pretty toxic. But what I want to share there, because this is liberation. It's not crapping on what you believe. It's liberation. But it's liberating you, not as an American, not as a male, not as a female, not as a white person, it's liberating you as a being. Organized religion is dogma. Dogma separates human beings. And the two most toxic dogmas on the planet are religion and a massive one you're seeing right now, nationality. Now, I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but today is April the 10th, 2025. And a couple of days ago, I saw where Donald Trump asked for $1 trillion for a military budget. China, I think, spends, I don't know, $300-400 billion, and the whole world spends trillions of dollars per year on defense. And they've spent hundreds of trillions over the past 100 years on defense. Look at the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Indians, the Brazilians, the North Koreans. And what I look at is this nationality, we're all the same. You take all the water off this planet, we're all going to starve. You vacuum the air off the planet, we're all going to suffocate. We're all the same, but it's the nationality and the religions that are toxic to humanity. But not only are they toxic to humanity, they're toxic to the evolution of you. If you look at the world today and you look back over history, look at the Holy Crusades, the Christian Crusades back 1,000 years ago. Look at the Middle East right now. Look at Israel and Palestine. How about the Sunnis and the Shia? How about this, the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews and the Hindus and the Muslims? You look at Myanmar, what's going on there, in Kashmir and Ethiopia and Sudan and Northern Ireland. Now, the reason I'm aware of this is because in college, I was a double major. I was a political science major and a psychology major. And as a political science major, my major area of focus was international relations. I never realized back then that I was looking at it more from a sociological perspective than I was a political perspective, because even back then, I still had the mindset that we're all the same. But what I want to point out, all of this division, whether it be the Muslims and the Jews, or the Christians and the Muslims, or the Hindus and the Muslims, or Ethiopia or Sudan, or whatever it is, this is all human nonsense that keeps you trapped and blinds you, and you're living deductively. You're living a deductive identity. So this week, we're going to work from inductive identity. Now, last week, we talked, obviously, about you being an infinite being. We talked about freeing you from the limitations. We talked about last week you being an unlimited source. And that's what I shared with you last week, is that I am unlimited source. So this week, your thought of the week is, and it's not just a thought of the week. This is not something you think analytically, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. This is something we integrate and we come to know. And the new awareness, it's not a thought, it's an awareness. The awareness this week is very simple, 5 words. I am a supreme being. Because in religion, we make that supreme being God, the Pope, Allah, all these kind of things. When all these things are nothing more than constructs by the human mind. The bigger picture in this episode is not to diffuse religion or nationality. It's to get you to think beyond the nationality and the religion that you inherited. I think back, and I remember hearing this a lot as a kid because I had to go to a fire and brimstone church. And I remember one day when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, I heard Brother Gene Horton, that was the pastor, Real Hondo Baptist Church, Brother Gene Horton, talking about how God made man in his image. You think about, what does that mean? If you are in the image of God, and God is holy, God is divine, God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, and you're in that image, just like I talked about the dropper of water out of the ocean to the ocean, wouldn't you also be a supreme being if God is those things, being made in God's image? Yes. But what a lot of people have a challenge with is they are so indoctrinated with their religion, they can't let it go. I remember a sister-in-law of mine and my partner, his family grew up outside of Boston. And my partner is a spiritualist, not religious, but he grew up Catholic. And one of his sisters and brother-in-laws that we always stay with when we go home for Thanksgiving, we get along with them really well. We get along with the whole family. But one night we were having dinner prior to like the Thanksgiving dinner 2 days later. Well, we went up a little early. And I was telling them about, it was an online quiz, and the website may be out there. I haven't checked in 15 years, called beliefnet.com. Beliefnet.com. And what it does is it ranks all of your beliefs. And then it actually is very accurate. It ranks all of your beliefs, and you have all these questions in varying degrees and varying answers. And then it actually matches up your belief systems to what religion it most corresponds to. And for me, I most corresponded to shamanism and least corresponded to Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism. And that's no indictment or no reflection on the value of any of this, other than that's just me and how I operate. Anyway, my sister-in-law took this quiz and she goes, oh my gosh, we all grew up Catholic. And I literally, when I look at the quiz results, and it ranks like 32 religions. And she goes, here's our ranking from the top to the bottom. And at the top, like in the top 5 places, I tend to be XYZ kind of air quote religion or belief system. Catholicism is all the way at the bottom for me. The next day, she and I and my partner, and we were going shopping to lunch or something. And they live outside of Boston in a small town. And as she stopped at a stoplight, she pointed and she said very jokingly, oh, there's the church that we go to that we don't believe in. And it's really funny because she never would have said that prior to taking that quiz, but she was going through the motions of that religion to some degree, because they're not devout Catholics, but they would go to mass and different things, and occasionally, and they weren't devout, but she wanted the kids to grow up with a spiritual foundation. So she wanted them to grow up with the foundation that apparently, and she thought she grew up with that, and apparently the kids should grow up with it also. In that moment, she was revealing her indoctrination. Again, I want to say in this episode, the whole point is not to tear down anything per se, and there's a part of me that, if I could push a button and wipe religion off the planet, I wouldn't do it, even though I know how hurtful it is to humanity. I would not do it because it serves its purpose for where humanity is in its current state and level of evolution. It's human created and it needs to be there, and humanity needs to evolve out of it as opposed to someone taking it away from them. Humanity needs to come to know who they are, and who they are is what you are, and what you are is a supreme being. Now, ask yourself these questions. If you truly knew that you were a supreme being, what power would you have? Would you get into your petty fears? Here's a big one. Would you worry about money? Here in the US, would you worry or cheer who was the American president? Would you worry about who liked you and didn't like you? If you knew yourself as a supreme being, how would your life be different? And when I say supreme being, I don't mean that from a 3D point of view, because if you're trying to analyze yourself into being a supreme being, it's not going to work. Why? Because you're doing it deductively. You're doing it from an extraordinarily limited identity, trying to analyze and rationalize your true identity, but you can't do it from your 3D identity. So it's not about being a supreme being means that you're arrogant from a 3D point of view or any of that, because to even try to, and I mean this kindly, and it took me a lot of years. I'm just going to be candid working with a shaman. Fortunately, I've had them to help me strip away the layers, so to speak. In TCP, we call it shucking the onion, peeling the onion, the layers of the onion. But to think you are a supreme being from a 3D identity is pretty much sophomoric and childish. It's not about thinking our way there. It's about knowing. It's about knowing the truth of yourself. But the truth, as I've said before, and I've said it many times in the podcast, is the truth was taken away from you when you were a little bitty baby. And you've learned to become the identity that you are. And people will say things like, oh, well, okay, I'm a devout Christian. The only reason for the most part, and there are small exceptions like 1%, you're a devout Christian or a Jew, as an example, or a Catholic, or, whatever it is, you're Hindu or Islamic, is because that's where you were dropped off on the planet. And then where we're dropped off and the families we're dropped off into is what we learn. When you look at animals and you look at baby animals, and you see this all the time on Instagram, maybe, for example, a mother tiger, and you see all kinds of videos like this on Instagram. A mother tiger has found a puppy, and the mother tiger starts nursing the puppy, and then the puppy grows up in, what is it, the den of tigers or whatever it's called, the brood, or I don't know what they call groups of tigers. Pack, I don't know. You see this all the time with one animal of one species, and they're raised by a different animal of another species, and they take on the characteristic of that species. So when we are raised with the characteristics of the 3D human being, we become that 3D human being, and we're simultaneously putting on a blindfold, not even recognize we're putting on a blindfold, and then we wear that blindfold throughout our entire life. And that blindfold on, we cannot see that we are a supreme being, which is the truth of us. I heard a motivational story many years ago. I will probably mangle it. There's a good chance I'll mangle it, but I'll tell you the story anyway. And if I mangle it, oh well. But the story was where this farmer, he raised chickens, and he found this egg that wasn't in a nest. Now, what he didn't know is that this nest was an eagle egg. So what he did is he put that eagle egg in the chicken nest, and that eagle egg hatched with the rest of the chicken eggs. Now, that eagle being born with the chickens, the eagle thought it was a chicken. So the eagle learned to be a good chicken. The eagle learned to scratch the ground for worms and everything else, and learned all the nature of being a chicken. And then one day, the eagle looks up in the sky and he sees this amazing, amazing bird. And the eagle looks over at another chicken and says, "What is that?" And the chicken says, "Well, that's an eagle. It's the king of all birds." And that baby eagle said, "Wouldn't it be amazing to be an eagle?" And his chicken friend said, "Put that thought out of your mind. You and I are just chickens." So that eagle lived the rest of its life as a chicken. And that's what we do on the planet. We live our lives in the identity that has been indoctrinated from us, and that quite literally steals our power as a supreme being. So it's time literally to wake up, like they say, wake up and smell the coffee. Wake up and smell the truth. Wake up and how about this? Be. Wake up and be the truth. So many things that people listen to the podcast for. So many of you listen because you want more money, you want better health, better relationships, more peace of mind, more freedom, whatever it is. And as I've said in the Be to Have series, which many of you guys did not attend, I know because I know our numbers and I know how many downloads we have on the podcast, is that we learn a context. And a context is a frame from which we experience the world. Now, if you recognized yourself as a supreme being, you wouldn't live from the context of being a human being. And if you lived from being a supreme being, how many challenges do you think you would have with money, love, health, If you lived and you knew yourself as a supreme being, would you throw tantrums? Would you be angry? Would you be shameful? Would you be resentful? Would you hold grudges? Would you abuse others? Would you tear other people down? Absolutely not. You wouldn't do that. And this is where, in many schools of thought, they talk about we are all one. But in our mind, we can't rationalize that. But we all are one. We are all from the one supreme being force. Every one of us is from that force, no matter where you were dropped off on the planet. So your takeaways are this. Consciousness is God. Consciousness is supreme beingness. Consciousness is the only reality, and consciousness is God. And because you are consciousness, you are also God. You know, as I've said before, talking about Don Javier being a sorcerer, he has said to me many times, he goes, in and of myself, I'm just a humble man. I get all of my power from source. He is a sorcerer. You are a sorcerer. I was talking to a good friend of mine, Gary Zukav. He's been on the podcast before. He wrote the book, Seed of the Soul, and several others, all New York Times best-selling books. I was talking to Gary about where did he get his information from. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear his response. And Gary has a particular guide. I don't know if he's ever mentioned the guide before, so I won't mention it. It's a non-physical being. That's his guide. And I said, Gary, you're a sorcerer. And he goes, no, I don't see it that way. Well, from my perspective, I do see it that way because even his guide is from source. The information on the paper is from source. Everything comes from source. Source is supreme. It's a supreme being. So because you are source, supreme being is source, you are a supreme being. So what we have to do, well, you don't have to do anything. But what would be powerful to do is sit with this episode and let it soak in. Literally, let it soak in to where you can start to know what I'm talking about. Maybe you go outside on a beautiful day. You know, I'm sitting here, I live in Sedona. I'm in my office right now, and I look out my window, and I have a 12-foot window in my office. It's all plate glass overlooking Sedona. And I look outside, and I'm going to go out my back deck after this episode, and there are trees in the backyard. Here's the thing. Those trees are actually creating oxygen and generating oxygen. But you know what? I am part of that experience because I'm breathing that oxygen. So source came from being on Earth. I came, meaning my physicality came from elements on the Earth, which are also universal elements. We're all from the same power. We are all a supreme power. Now, in the Secret podcast, I want to dig deeper into this and talk more about what it means to be source and experiencing yourself as source. So if you've not joined my Be to Have Insiders, you may want to consider it. It's app.jimfortin.com. Join my app, join the Be to Have Insiders, and you'll have access to the Secret podcast there. But in the Secret podcast, I'm going to talk more about my near-death experience and experiencing ourselves in a supreme kind of way. Your transformational takeaway in this particular episode is this: the awareness, the knowing, the beingness that I am a supreme being. Now, as I was saying, sit with this. I mentioned, outside in the trees, but where I was going there, don't try to think your way through this. Don't analyze your way through it because you will never figure this out analyzing it. It has to be an epiphany. It has to be an awareness, because when you have that epiphany and that awareness and aha, that is an awakening, and that awakening to the higher part of you. And when you come to know this truth that I'm talking about in this episode, in that moment, you become a zero limit person. So your takeaway, I am a supreme being. For those of you that are over in the Be to Have Insiders, I'll catch you over for a continuation of this episode on the Secret Podcast. For the rest of you, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you over on another episode. Bye-bye.